1921, a new government takes over in Tehran. It denounces the British treaty and signs a new one with the Soviet government in Moscow. Iran is depending on the Russians to help them eliminate the British presence. By the end of 1920, nationalist Arabs are rioting in Egypt and Palestine. King Saud of Arabia and Prince Faisal are fighting the British and French with their own armies. Sentiment grows in London that Great Britain should withdraw from the Middle East entirely. The British Foreign Office believes that the new Soviet regime in Moscow is behind much of the unrest. But it is really Great Britain and France, two Western countries trying to impose their rule on a predominantly Muslim world. In early 1921, Churchill takes charge of the government's Middle Eastern policy as colonial secretary. The Arabs want Palestine, but leaders of the Jewish Zionist movement are encouraging Jews around the world to resettle there. Arab landowners fear that they will be pushed out of their land. The Zionists point to the Balfour Declaration of 1917 as a justification from the British government itself for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. In July of 1922, Churchill argues before the House of Commons that Britain must accept a mandate over Palestine from the League of Nations. The measure is adopted, and Britain is committed to ensuring the security of a Jewish homeland in the Middle East. By the end of 1922, the League of Nations has approved a system of mandates that leaves France in charge of Syria and Lebanon, while Great Britain controls Palestine, Jordan, and Iraq. Prince Faisal, driven from Syria by the French, now rules in Iraq under the influence of London. His brother, Prince Abdullah, is chosen by the British to rule the new nation of Jordan, while west of the Jordan River, the Jewish nation is promised a homeland in Palestine. A national homeland for the Kurds never materializes, and they are spread to this day across parts of Turkey, Iran, and Iraq. But British plans go somewhat awry in Arabia. In a 6-year war, from 1919 to 1925, the new kingdom of Saudi Arabia emerges, where huge oil reserves will soon be discovered. In Syria and Lebanon, French General Maxime Weygand and his troops fight against Muslim insurrections for several years. Not until the 1930s will Damascus and Beirut gain real independence. In redrawing the map of the Middle East for the benefit of Western political and economic aims, and in selecting pro-Western leaders to rule Muslims of various cultures and religious beliefs, Europe guarantees that the future of the Middle East will be plagued by civil strife, regional wars, and foreign occupation. The key ingredient for political stability, legitimacy, has been largely destroyed by a Western fabrication that has virtually ignored the history and traditions of the Middle East.
The decisions that were made in and after the First World War about the Middle East are responsible for the unending strife and conflict there, for it seeming so hopeless. On the other hand, for all we know, if some other settlement had been imposed instead of this one, it might have been worse. I mean, that's one of the things that historians are limited in. We know what happened. We don't know what would have happened if some other decision had been made. We can guess, but we can't know.
By dividing the Arab world between them, and by guaranteeing a Jewish homeland in Palestine, Britain and France actually accelerate the rise of Arab nationalism and all too frequent conflicts in the Middle East. Even decisive wars create as many new problems as they solve old ones. Palestine faces decades of political and social strife as Jewish Zionism fights for a new homeland, and Arabs fight back. In 1948, Britain finally gives up on its mandate in Palestine as no solution can be found to satisfy both Jewish and Arab nationalists who are fighting a civil war. The independent state of Israel is declared, and the Israeli Jews wage 4 separate wars against Arab nations over the next 25 years. In between wars, the Jewish nation fights a running battle with a variety of Muslim terrorist groups. By the 1950s, Iraq and Iran nationalized their oil industries, and Egypt takes the Suez Canal from Great Britain. The Middle East becomes a major playing field for Cold War tensions between the Soviet Union and Western powers. Both sides compete for influence among the Arab governments.
How is the battle between our country and the Soviet power complex, how is it going in the Middle East?
Well, sir, I'm going to speak quite truthfully and plainly, because I think the American people are entitled to the facts on this situation. I believe that we are rapidly losing the Cold War in the Near East, in the very heart of the Near East, namely the Arab states.
Could you tell us very briefly, if we lost the Near East because of this increasing communist pressure, what would Russia gain and what would we lose?
Well, everyone knows about the oil. The Near Eastern countries, the Arab countries, are producing over 2 million barrels a day of petroleum today. That is more than 25% of what we produce in this country. If we lost it, I suspect it would very shortly mean gasoline rationing and fuel rationing in this country.
In January 1991, the United States and its allies respond to the invasion of oil-rich Kuwait by its bellicose neighbor, Iraq. In a matter of weeks, the coalition built against Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein attacks his army in Kuwait and drives it back toward Baghdad, just as the British had done in World War I. The Gulf War is a one-sided affair, but the job is left undone. Saddam Hussein and his army live to fight another day. Civil violence and foreign invasion still occur all too frequently in the Middle East. Western economies still depend on the region's oil, and Western governments still must deal with the fear that oil supplies may be cut off. Among the Muslim people, from Istanbul to Tehran, anti-Western sentiment has never been greater, and terrorist attacks against the West have become more deadly. The defeat of the Ottoman Empire in 1918 turned out to be a hollow victory for the West. The seeds of discontent planted at the end of World War I have grown into a fearful harvest. As the author David Fromkin has written, the treaty forced upon the Muslim world was indeed a peace to end all peace. And it is peace that remains elusive in the land of blood and oil.